I want to explain the whistleblower complaint behind Tulsi Gabbard's conspiracy theories about Barack Obama.
People who say, well, Tulsi, this is just your view or your interpretation. No.
I really didn't think we were going to have to do this because the claims are so flimsy. But the other day, Tulsi Gabbard fired 37 people.
Some of those folks and those 37 individuals that we revoked directed the revocation of security clearances from today under the direction of President Trump. They aided and abetted in this action, this seditious conspiracy.
And that includes one of the NSA's top mathematicians, a guy by the name of Vin Nguyen, and also fired a woman named Shelby Pearson, who was in charge of analysis for the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency. So 2 super important intelligence officers fired, and both of them were fired based off the same whistleblower complaints.
There is irrefutable evidence that detail how President Obama and his national security team directed the creation of an intelligence community assessment that they knew was false.
That her ridiculous conspiracy theory about Barack Obama was based on.
They knew it would promote this contrived narrative that Russia interfered in the 2016 election to help President Trump win, selling it to the American people as though it were true.
And so I wanted to go back and talk about where it came from.
Did you want President Trump to win the election, and did you direct any of your officials to help him do that?
Yes, I did. Yes, I did.
So this whistleblower in 2016 was in charge of intelligence for compromise of voting machines.
The Department of Homeland Security identified 21 states that Russian government hackers targeted during the 2016 election. While they were clear that there was no tampering with actual votes, one state, Illinois, did have personal information of voters exposed. The others were likely scanned for vulnerabilities.
He's got an East Asian background, not a Russian background, so he was coming at it from a different direction. And he was tasked with somebody else to track those. Before the ICA, this whistleblower, his boss, we think it's Nguyen, said, stop worrying about that one compromise. It's something else. And fine, whatever. There were 3 versions of the ICA. One was super classified, one was classified, and one was unclassified. And he was asked to scrub the classified one from an analytical standpoint. When he was doing that, so literally at the very last minute, he's like, why are we approaching foreign media in the way we are? Why are we looking only at Russian foreign media rather than look at all these Western European entities that are complaining about Donald Trump? Finally, when they got to a finding that Russia wanted to influence the election rather than just interfere in the counting of the election.
According to the U.S. intelligence community's assessment, the campaign was directed from the very seat of power in Russia, Vladimir Putin himself, and it had at least 3 elements: online propaganda, hacking into and exposing political organizations and individuals' emails, and targeting state election systems.
He didn't back the main finding about that. And this is, of course, the same claim that Tulsi Gabbard is making.
The Intelligence Committee's oversight report reveals that CIA Director Brennan overruled senior CIA officers who challenged the Obama-ordered intelligence assessment, stating, quote, "We don't have direct information that Putin wanted to get Trump elected."
In his whistleblower complaint, one of the bases is exactly the same thing she used when she first rolled out this conspiracy theory.
The Presidential Daily Brief, drafted on December 8th of 2016, stated that no Russian or criminal actors impacted vote counts. This document was pulled just hours before it was to be published due to, quote unquote, new guidance.
Which is that there was a change in judgment
for this Obama-directed new intelligence assessment. Again, stating and alleging that Putin, Russia, tried to help Trump win the election.
What she's actually doing is conflating a judgment about the voting machines to a judgment that incorporates the DNC hack and leak.
The hacked information was released using WikiLeaks, the Guccifer 2.0 persona, and the site dcleaks.com. The intelligence community linked the hacking groups, dubbed APT-28 and APT-29, or Fancy Bear and Cozy Bear, to Russia's military intelligence service, the GRU. The CIA determined that the hacks were part of Russia's efforts, not just to undermine confidence in the election, but to actively help Trump win the presidency.
So it's not analytically sound. It involves believing that voting machines are the same thing as DNC servers. And the source of that is this whistleblower. So he didn't back this finding about Russia. You know, you can sort of grant him the benefit of the doubt because, one, he was approaching it from the voting machine perspective, and two, he was compartmented out of what we now know is SVR intelligence that showed, for example, that Vladimir Putin approved the hack and leak himself. Nevertheless, it gets worse because in mid-January, he had a conflict with his supervisor, again, believed to be Wynn, where Wynn said, I really want you to back this Russia influence finding. And the whistleblower was like, no, you either show me the intelligence or I'm not going to do it. And Wynn said, I really want you to, so that the Defense Intelligence Agency joins this finding. Now, at this point, it's sort of a stupid complaint anyway, because this was weeks after the ICA was released. And we know that because this whistleblower now bases his reason for objecting to everything, and this is the source of his paranoia, based on a rumor about how James Clapper responded to what he claims was Jim Comey's decision to brief the dossier to Donald Trump. So you can imagine what happens, right? So he doesn't know about the dossier. He doesn't know that the dossier, based on an agreement by all three top spooks, was going to be included in the most classified version, but not affecting intelligence at all. And then the dossier blows up in early January 2017, partly because Jim Comey briefed it to Trump. He then smells a rat. He thinks that the intelligence he didn't get to see, which he was compartmented from, which is SVR intelligence, not the dossier, is the basis for the finding about Russia. And frankly, you still see this in Tulsi's conspiracy theories. It explains where her conspiracy theories come from.
We now know that one of the source documents that the Obama administration used in the creation of this intelligence assessment in January of 2017 was none other than the discredited, unverified Steele dossier.
But it is based, by his own telling, off a rumor about how James Clapper responded to the inclusion of the dossier in that briefing for Donald Trump.
The dossier was referenced in the intelligence assessment's main body text and further detailed in a 2-page assessment annex. John Brennan lied, and he denied using this dossier in this intelligence assessment that President Obama ordered because he knew it was discredited.
That's early 2017. Maybe we can grant him that. He doesn't launch a whistleblower complaint at that point. It's not until 2019 where he is given a FOIA response which says, we want you to look at the dossier for this because Shelby, so he believes this is Pearson Shelby, may or may not be, believes this should be responded to by the NIC, meaning him, as the dossier, quote, was a factor in the 2017 ICA on the election interference in which an assessment of the document was added as an annex. So please review this and see, this is for a FOIA again. Please review this and see if you can find any references to the dossier. And he goes nuts, right? Because remember, he has a conspiracy theory that the findings that he disagreed with are rooted in the dossier rather than in this SVR intelligence, that's stuff stolen from Russia. And he loses it. He was like, I was not in all compartments. At no point did blah, 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 and this may be Wynn, suggest there was any analytically significant reporting that I was not seeing, with the exception of compartmented material. At no point did I see or consider what I gather is or represented to be dossier materials. So you see what happened is he gets a FOIA, somebody says the dossier was included as an appendix. An assessment of the dossier was included as the appendix, and he assumes it says something radically different. He assumes that it says
that one of the source documents that the Obama administration used in the creation of this intelligence assessment in January of 2017 was none other than the discredited, unverified Steele dossier.
We know that's not true. In fact, one of the things that's crazy about this conniption fit is there was so much that was in the public realm, including that the dossier had been included as an annex to the ICA. You know, at some point you have to wonder whether he's feigning ignorance. And then he responds again, and he presents it as a binary choice. If the dossier material was used by the NIC, unless it is also compartmented, my NIO, again meaning Wynn, intentionally deceived and excluded me from the things I was cleared for and had need to know throughout his entire tenure here. I prefer to think that isn't true, but if it was, we have a problem. And then he says, if instead Shelby or possibly Wynn are misspeaking about what the NIC was considering in its analyses, the pretty reckless idea to fling out an official correspondence email. And of course, that's the irony, because he's the one flinging shit out. And he's the one who's wrong about what happened with the dossier. The dossier was included as an annex, but it very specifically said, quote, we have only limited corroboration of sources reporting in this case and did not use it to reach the analytic conclusions of the CIA, FBI, and NSA assessment. And importantly, it was compartmented because what they did in that assessment in one passage was to compare what the dossier said with stuff that was in that compartmented intelligence. So it was classified at that compartmented level, not because of the dossier itself, but because of that comparison discussion. Anyway, he blows up. He just blows up. And that's when he first starts filing a whistleblower complaint. But the other thing he did is he went back and he started seeing ghosts everywhere. So, for example, he had been approached by a law firm, not Perkins Coie, early in 2016 about voting insecurities. And he came to the conclusion retrospectively that that must be an attempt to influence the investigation. He then came to the conclusion that these intrusions, which the ICA publicly describes as cyber criminals trying to get data on Americans, he decides that no, that's instead Rodney Jaffe and Michael Sussman playing with DNS records. And he has no basis for this. And in fact, in his complaint, he cites a 2022 filing from John Durham that John Durham had to substantially walk back, that was based on false dates, was based on basically an attempt to get a tax on Rodney Jaffe, not based on actual facts. So his conspiracy theory is based on a abusive legal filing, and that's it. And frankly, Tulsi didn't declassify where his DNS conspiracy theories came from, probably because they wouldn't hold up. And then he tries to reach out to Durham's team. He finally gets in touch with them in spring of 2022, and they're like, look, we've got some trials to deal with. Maybe we'll get back to you later. And he gets infuriated that they don't get back to him later without thinking that, particularly at the Sussman trial, the DNS theory was proven to be a shit show, right? At the Sussman trial, the assumptions that Durham had and that two FBI guys had, and therefore by association that this whistleblower had about DNS, were all wrong. They were wrong about the source, wrong about the validity of the anomaly. And he's stewing at this point. He's like, why won't they call me back? And so he keeps stewing until 2023, until 2025, and then Tulsi comes in.
We're here today because the American people deserve the truth.
And because he is saying precisely what Tulsi wants to hear, what Donald Trump wants to hear, all of a sudden, these wild conspiracy theories, which at this point, by 2023, when he filed his complaint, James Clapper's testimony saying that they had a plan in advance to brief the dossier.
Our whole point, though, in briefing then President-elect Trump about it was, I felt strongly, and I think we all did, that we owed it to him to warn him that it was out there, without respect to the content. The Russians will use compromise, whether it's real or contrived, if they can, to exert leverage.
Meaning that rumor he based everything on was wrong. All the details about how the dossier was an appendix to the ICA, public. More details about the intrusions into the voter registration, public, developed. And so all of his bases for his conspiracy theories were debunked by 2023 when he was making these formal complaints. But he never went back and reconsidered his theories. Now he's been rewarded. If I understand his identity correctly, he, for a while, was serving in the White House in a cybersecurity function and now is involved in Space Force and probably involved in the Golden Dome, which is a giant boondoggle.
I want to talk about the proposed Golden Dome missile defense system. You're proposing spending not just $25 billion, but upwards of, I think CBO estimated this at least $500 billion, other estimates, $1 trillion. I am all for having a system that would work. I am not sure that the physics can get there on this.
Back when he started, I think that the whistleblower was working in good faith, was trying to adhere to what he calls the religion of analysis. He was defending tradecraft, but having refused to go back and reconsider his conspiracy theory based on the fact that the bases for it had all been debunked 6 years later, he now is the one driving these personnel decisions, as a result, getting people fired who were really critical to keeping America safe.
No,